Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. 1040, verse number 7. Anyesha Sanskritatmano vidhinabhihitam hitena te jajanti tvan mayastvam bhai bahomurtyeka murtikam anye cha sankritatmano vidhinabhihatena te jajanti tvan mayastvam bhai bahomurtyeka murtikam. Nisha sankritatmano vidhinabhihatena te jajanti tvam mayastvam bhai bahomurtyeka murtikam. Anye cha sankritatmano vidhinabhihatena te Ladies. Anye, others, cha, and, sangskrita, purified, atmanaha, whose intelligence, vidhina, by the injunctions of scriptures as the Pancharatra. Abhitena, presented, te, by you, yajanti, worship, tvat mayaha, filled with thought of you, tvam, you, vai, indeed, bahomurti, having many forms, ekamurtikam, having one form. Translation, and yet others, those whose intelligence is pure, follow the injunctions of the Vaishnava scriptures promulgated by you, absorbing their minds in thought of you. They worship you as the one supreme Lord, manifesting in multiple forms. And the purport, the word Sanskritatmanaha, they whose intelligence is pure, is significant here. It implies that the worshippers mentioned before have not completely purified their intelligence of material contamination and thus worship the Lord indirectly. Those who are purified, however, directly worship the Lord either as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Lord Krishna, or as one of his various plenary forms, such as Vasudeva, Sankarshan, Pradyumna, or Aniruddha, as indicated here. The context, again, this is Akrura speaking to Krishna. They're in Mathura, and Krishna had made a promise, and he fulfilled his promise that after some time he would visit Akrura in his home, and now he's visiting Akrura in his home in Mathura. And the chapter title is The Prayers of Akrura. We know that Akrura is one of the persons who, in the 9 processes of bhakti, achieved perfection. And his was through prayer, but it's not these prayers that's specifically being referred to. It's specifically referring to the prayers that he offered on his way from Vrindavan to Mathura. He saw what he saw. He saw the spiritual world, and Krishna and Balaram seated on the chariot, and he offered prayers. Here's another set of prayers, and it's presenting Krishna Tattva, or truths about Krishna. We know that the whole of Vedic wisdom, as Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, Veda ishtasayavar aham eva vedyo. The purpose of the Vedas is to know Krishna. So there's direct and there's indirect ways of wanting to know Krishna. And going back a couple of verses, the Brahmanas that do karma kanda rituals, following procedures, and that is propitiating devas for things, that's worshiping Krishna indirectly. That's very clear. Because where the devas get their capacity to bestow benedictions or blessings or, good fortune upon worshippers, they derive the power from Krishna. So it's worshiping Krishna indirectly. But it's worship of Krishna, but indirectly. And they may not know that they're worshiping Krishna. They may not be their intention. Their intention is worship a deva because they want something. And it's pious to get the thing that you want or need from the devas. That's Vedic. It nourishes piety or mode of goodness. And then yesterday's verse is, we mentioned this yesterday, karma kanda jnana kanda. And the followers of the Vedas that are keeping the jnana kanda process intact, they're worshiping Krishna. Here in this verse it's saying indirectly. Indirectly because their consciousness is not yet purified. Sanskritat manam, samskritat manaha. They whose intelligence is pure, it means in contrast to those whose intelligence is not pure. So those who like to listen to Prabhupada's lectures, you're very familiar with Avishuddha Buddhaya. Inyarvindaksha vimuktabaninas tvayastabhavad Avishuddha Buddhaya. Avishuddha Buddhi is impure intelligence, Shuddha, and Vishuddha and Avishuddha, impure intelligence. And those who have impure intelligence, what do? They try to reach the supreme or transcendence through knowledge. So again, Khanda section of the Vedas. And those that are following exactly as is described, they push to the side the fruitive activities found in the Vedas, and they feel, we graduated from that. We've gone to the searching for the absolute through the cultivation of knowledge. They perform the sacrifice of philosophical investigation to worship you. Now, one could say they're not worshiping him, and one could say they are worshiping him. They're worshiping him indirectly, because their search is for knowledge, and he is the Jnana Vigraham. They haven't discovered it yet. That source of knowledge is Krishna. We know this from Bhagavad Gita. Bahunam janmanam mante jnanavan mam prapajate. It may take many lifetimes for that path to get to the position where Vasudeva is everything. Krishna is everything. He is the Jnana Vigraha. So they may not be there yet, just like we're followers of the bhakti process, and we can say, we're not there yet. We're not at the fruit of the bhakti process, but we're following the process. And these followers are also worshiping Krishna in his original form of knowledge. That's how it's translated, the embodiment of knowledge, or the original form of knowledge. But they're not there yet. And generally such people, because they're not aware of the form of the Supreme, they're interested rather in the Brahman feature of the Supreme. But they're in Bhagavad Gita, they're also called Ekatvena, Pataktvena, Bahuda Vishvatomakam. They're worshippers of the universal form, they're worshippers of the demigods, and they're worshippers of Ekatvena, the one Supreme. That's these people. And Krishna is considering each of them, those three categories. They're also my devotees. So Krishna is being very liberal in that verse of Bhagavad Gita to include the Ekatvena, the worshippers of the one Supreme, as his devotees, which is what this verse, text 6, yesterday's verse, is saying. And now it's, and yet, the further stage of spiritual progress, as given in the Vedas, is taken up by those whose intelligence has become purified, or have pure intelligence. Sanskrita Atmana, whose intelligence is purified. It's in that stage of purified intelligence. Vidhi na. Vidhi means rules or injunctions. And vidhi na, it's not Prabhupada, it's the BBT translation, word for word, is of such scriptures as the Pancharatra. Because the Pancharatra, or the Pancharatriki Vidhi, is the system within the Vedas that Vaishnavas follow. There's other systems within the Vedas that the Vaishnavas don't follow. And that's the system of worship of demigods. But the Pancharatrika system is for the direct worship of the personality of Godhead. Where the Narada Pancharatra is one of them, a principal one for Vaishnava worshippers. And the Vidhis, the rules, Vidhena is the verse, they come from those scriptures, the Pancharatra. So the Shruti, Smriti, Puranadi, Pancharatriki Vidhimbina, Aikantiki Harer Bhaktir, Utpataya Kalpate. The Pancharatras is part of the authorized literature, especially appropriate for Vaishnavas, because the rest of the verse is speaking of they worship his form. yajanti. They worship. Yaja means worship. They worship his form in pure devotion with pure intelligence. So that's really nice. The Krishna confirms the same thing in his talks with Uddhava. Those who are most dear to me, who understand me, who know me, and who worship me directly with no motivation. So with no motivation means those that have motivation and aren't ready for the stage of direct worship of Krishna, there's procedures to help them get to the place where their desires are reduced, minimized, and then through contact with bhakti, move on to direct devotional service. That they're dearest to Krishna. And Akrura is recognizing that, the dearness of these categories of devotees. This is the translation again. And yet others, those whose intelligence is pure, follow the injunctions of the Vaishnava scriptures promulgated by you. Absorbing their minds in thought of you, they worship you as the one Supreme Lord, manifesting in multiple forms. For some, it's confusing. And for those that have an understanding of Krishna Tattva, like Akrura does, it's not confusing. The multiple forms. It's not confusing. It's part of the superlative nature of Krishna. He has multiple forms, and some are attracted for different reasons. This form, that form, the other form, mentioned in the purport. My guess is, I didn't check, my guess is it's taken from commentators that say, such as Vasudeva Sankarshan, Pradyumna Aniruddha. One example of this that comes to mind right away is who was Vritrasura in his previous life? King Chitraketu, right? So King Chitraketu got a lot of mercy. The mercy that he got was from first Angira, and then it was Angira and Narada. And he got on the other side of his material desires by circumstance and by instruction. And then he was given bhakti. He was given a particular mantra by Narada for him to chant. And in that mantra given by Narada to King Chitraketu to chant, there's the names of all four. Vasudeva, Sankarshan, Pradyumna, Aniruddha. It's right in the mantra. And he followed Narada's teaching. He went away and did the mantra. It says, right in the verse, that within a week, in 7 days, the Supreme Lord came before him. Like, that was pretty fast. He must have been very qualified. Although, attached in one sense, he got over that attachment. We were speaking about this yesterday. Sensually weak, but, in heart not weak. Essentially wobbly, but in heart not wobbly. So he through good association, he was headed in the right direction. And he was actually a very elevated personality. So he saw Lord Sankarshan. And he offered prayers to Lord Sankarshan. Lord Sankarshan offered benedictions to him. And he's one such worshipper. Now, there may be other forms, and there may be other forms. One of those other forms, it's just from preparing for some seminars I've been working on of late. When Indra does the Indra again, he offends Brihaspati. They lose their kingdom. The demons are advised by Shukracharya. They've become weakened because they've offended their spiritual master, their teacher, their acharya. So get your weapons. Now is your chance. They're in a weak position. So sure enough, the demigods were defeated by the demons. So Indra went to Lord Brahma, help. Brahma scolded him and gave him an instruction. You can get what you need to protect yourself from Twashta's son. Twashta was Indra's brother. They had the same mother and father. They were brothers. Twashta was one of the direct sons of Kashyapa and Aditi. So Kashyapa has a son. Twashta has a son. His name is Vishwarup. But he has a little inclination for the from his mother's side, because his mother was not. She was from one of the children of Diti. So she's in the Daitya group. So he has some affinity for his mother. And if you have no problem with that, then you can take help from him. So they took help from him. He gave them a mantra by which Narayana Kavacha, which he could be protected. Sure enough, it worked. And Indra was really happy. They got their kingdom back. Everything was nice. And they thought, wow, he's really good. Maybe he can help us do some other rituals. So he was doing rituals where he was offering oblations to the demigods, but there were also mantras where he was worshipping oblations to the Daityas. And nobody could follow what he was doing because he's, chanted his mantras real fast. You know how it is. But it came to Indra's attention that he's offering oblations not only to us, but to the Daityas. So he got angry. And he lost it. He cut off his heads. That was a big mistake. And so Twashta wanted to punish Indra for killing his son. And so he created a demon, Ritrasura, that was very powerful. And Ritrasura with the Daityas went back and big battle, and they smashed the demigods. Now this time, Indra was appealing to the Supreme Lord, and the explanation is given. The Supreme Lord appeared in the form of Vasudeva Krishna, because the Prabhupada's explanation is, this is just Bhagavatam Katha, to help appreciate the depth of knowledge, and there are multiple forms. So Prabhupada writes, when the devotees need help for protection purposes, Vasudeva is the form they call upon. So he knew which form to show. He showed the Vasudeva Krishna form, and some advice was given, which just keeps going. It's a detail. It's a nice detail. He said, you were protected, Indra, you were protected by the Narayana Kavacha that was given to you by Vishwarup. But Vishwarup got it from his father, Twashta. And Twashta got it from Dadichi. So by now, Dadichi is really powerful. And his bones are really powerful. So go to Dadichi and ask him for his bones. And if you send the Ashwini Kumaras as your representative, now remember there was kind of an issue between Indra, the Ashwini Kumaras, but Indra overlooked that because he wanted something. And Dadichi gave his bones, and the bones were used by Vishwakarma to make a thunderbolt that was meant for the destruction of Vritrasura. Anyway, there are different forms of the Lord. That's the point in the verse. And so he has many forms. What's the Sanskrit? Bahu Murti. Bahu Murti, very direct, many forms, although he has one form. Eka Murtikam. Many forms, one form. So that's bewildering to ordinary people, but for devotees, it's like, wow, he has spiritual potencies. He can do these things. Now, one last point, and the last point is mentioned yesterday. Akrura is not a Brijbasi. To become a Brijbasi is really rare and really special, and there's qualification required from our teachings of Lord Chaitanya and his followers, particularly Rupa Goswami, how one can get to that stage. And one of the other persons, in addition to Akrura and Lord Brahma Shukadev, appreciating, and Uddhava, appreciating the uniqueness of the residents of Vrindavan. There's a celebrated verse that I'm going to recite. It ends Krita Punya Punja. Those that like to hear Prabhupada's recorded lectures, you know that phrase. Krita Punya Punja refers to the cowherd boys that are even beyond the persons who Akrura is speaking of here in this verse. It's a series, a gradual series, just like it's described in Bhagavad Gita, a gradual series. But it's not, the Braja Prema is not indicated in Bhagavad Gita. It is indicated in the Bhagavatam. Braja Prema is very special. So it's in chapter 12, canto 10, where Shukadeva Goswami is describing to Maharaj Parikshit the pastimes of Krishna. And in chapter 12, Krishna is still 5 years old. He's with calves and the cowherd boys, and they go out in the morning, and it describes what they do. And they're really just playing into this and that and the other and the other and the other. They're just like little children will play. They were playing. But it wasn't a kind of mindless playing that sometimes little children will do. It was very exalted playing. Krishna was stimulating their love. That's what Krishna does. He stimulates the love of his devotees. And he knows their love, and he knows how to stimulate their love. So he was enjoying with them, and they were enjoying with him. And it, some persons like the idea of becoming cowherd boys. And Shukadeva Goswami is honoring them. He not only honors the cowherd boys, he honors Mother Jasoda and Nanda Maharaj and the gopis and so forth. But in this particular reference, it starts Itam Satam Brahmasukanu Bhrutya. That connects with yesterday's verse. Brahmasuk. Brahma Suk, the happiness of Brahman. There are persons that aspire for Brahma Suk. Itam Satam. Satam. They're attached to Sat. And in that attachment to Sat, they're hankering for Brahma Suk. It's the same as yesterday's verse, those following the Gyan process. They want a happiness that comes from becoming attached to the Absolute, or the yesterday's verse was the form of knowledge. Dasyam gatam nam paradaivatena. That's today's verse. Dasyam. There are those that worship in the mood of loving service. So, it's similar to what we do, or try to do, sadhana bhakti, and that is worship the Supreme Lord. So there's a happiness that comes from worshiping the Supreme Lord in that way. And then mayashatanam nara darakena. There are those that think of Krishna as just an ordinary person, nara. And so they don't have much regard for him. But then sakham, those who are his friends, these cowherd boys that are Krishna's sakhas, they're experiencing a happiness that is unknown to the other three. The happiness of the worldly person, the happiness of the dasya bhakta, the happiness of the brahmasuk pursuers. They're in another plane. So that's in chapter 12. We're already in chapter 40. And, we're just not forgetting chapter 12, because Akrura is not a Brijvasi. He understands the exalted nature of the residents of Vrindavan, as do so many. Queen Kunti understands. She's just bewildered by it, and so forth and so on. The Bhagavatam wants to get us, if we're ready to go, the Baba will take us there, to this special appreciation for the residents of Vrindavan, appreciation for the platform of pure devotion, where, as in this morning's verse, the intelligence becomes purified, or in the state of pure intelligence, one simply worships, without any attachment to the fruitive gain or anything that's going to come from it. That's the glorification that's being given by Akrura in this morning's verse. And those persons are very dear to Krishna. Krishna confirms, they're very dear to me. But those who are very dear to Krishna can't compare to those residents of Vrindavan in Krishna's regard for them. He's impartial and he's partial. Let's see if there's some discussion.
Hare Krishna, Shri Swami. I was asking here in your class, just came to me this thought that in this Abhishuddha Buddhaya that you quote, this on pure intelligence, is it correct to say that in that state of impure intelligence, we either see the Bahumurti or the many forms? Thus, you have the polytheistic form, the worship of the demigods, and then on the other hand, you have this monotheistic that is just a singular, but not the many. You reject the many. So in this conception of Bahumurti Ekamurtikam, is simultaneously, is a complete, simultaneously you have the conception of the one, but at the same time he can have unlimited forms. So that's this purified intelligence that allows one to realize and fully understand that. In example,
allows one to realize what?
To fully understand that inconceivable feature of the Lord. Is that a correct understanding?
I think so. I mean, you said a mouthful, but it sounds like. Let's keep it simple. In Sri Vaishnavism, there's one form, Narayana. And from Narayana comes many. But those forms are non-different than Narayana. That's their conception. So that's what's being spoken of in this verse, the last line there. The many are but expansions, non-different expansions of Narayana. And in a similar fashion, we have the understanding Krishna is even the source of Narayan, so there's many forms, including Narayan. Krishna is the Eka, and who are the Vishnu Tattva forms. So one can say Vishnu Tattva or Krishna Tattva, but it's similar. So now, if your question is, if one comes to that position where they may have a liking for a particular form of the Lord, here's a for example. In Sri Vaishnavism, Ramanujacharya assembled the teachings, but the teachings come from the Alvars. And the Alvars wrote verses in Tamil. And there's 4,000 of them. And that's the foundation of the teachings. So amongst the Alvars, there's two, Andal and Nam Alvar, who wrote in the mood of gopis, which means, very similar, sounding like a verse you might hear Rupa Goswami write. But the conception that they have is they like that particular form. Others like the form of Ram, others like the form of Nrsimha, others like the form of whatever. When Bhaktisiddhanta was young, he was given a form of kurma, if my memory is correct, by Bhaktivinoda Thakur. So, etc. One may be attracted to a particular form, but that's one of the forms that's from the original. And now the scriptural understanding of what the original is may differ from this to that sampradaya. But the principle is the same principle. So if your question is, if one has accepted that principle, there's one original form from which there's many expansions, the many expansions are from the one original form and not different, then yeah. If that was your question. Is that your question?
Yes, yes.
Okay. And how does one reach that? Supposing you're covered in ignorance and you really don't know, so there must be some authority that one looks up to and accepts. And the disciplic succession is that authority, and the disciplic succession makes reference to Scripture, and they have their perspective based upon what Scripture says, and then in disciplic succession, one can receive. And then that's the conclusion that's going to be reached, what's here in this verse.
Hare Krishna, Guru Maharaj. Yeah.
Hare Krishna.
So, intelligence of those who desire material things and fruitive desires is not purified. Is my understanding correct? And my question is, but there are, like, when we come to this spirituality, we understand that Krishna is the Supreme Lord and the other forms are coming from Krishna. We don't have any material desires.
We don't have any what desire?
Material desires. But then we start having other desires, like I want to be the cook, I want to be the pujari, I want to be the temple president, etc. So a person who understands that Krishna is the head, other forms are coming from Krishna, he does not have any other material desires, but he has these kinds of desires. Is his intelligence purified?
I'm not sure what you're asking. Let me say back what I think you're asking. And you tell me, did I hit it or not? at the stage where one accepts there is a source of everything, that source of everything is Krishna, and there's then some material desires. There's some desires in terms of service, preferred service to Krishna. You want to know, is that a spiritual desire, or is that the influence of material desire? That's what your question is?
Yes.
One of the very simple answers to give is, let's just safely assume that our desires are mixed. Because we're not yet at the stage of Shuddha Bhakti, we're at the stage of Sadhana Bhakti. So it's mixed. There's some in spiritual and some material. So desiring a particular service is not spiritual or material. It's probably a mix. And then there's a stage where it's unmixed. And that's what we're striving for. So while we're doing the mixed, we should be striving for the unmixed. Unmixed means there's only one purpose here. And that's, I'm not at the center, but Krishna's pleasure is at the center. And we're striving for that. While you're desiring this service, that service, or some other service. Because as soon as you get into that kind of thinking, it's already mixed, and then any happiness that comes is because, it's self-centered, and some other service comes along that you don't like, and then you don't put your heart into it, because it's not my preferred service. So we find this nice verse in Bhagavad Gita, I'm sure you're familiar. There's routine, there's preferred, and there's emergency kinds of service, right? So when you have preferred, you can do what the preferred is. But if there's some assigned service, then that's it. That's what you do. And one of the operative principles for us, for sadhakas, is service that's assigned to us from higher authority. Ultimately, Prabhupada writes, from the spiritual master. One devotee, made a strong impression. One devotee asked Prabhupada long ago, is it okay to be attached to your service? And Prabhupada's answer was yes. And then if the spiritual master assigns you some other service, you become very quickly unattached, and you become attached to the new service because it's under the order of the spiritual master. That's how he answered at that particular time. Okay. Anyone else? Over here. Yeah, Mataji.
There are 9 personalities that exemplify achieving perfection through the 9 processes of devotional service. And it seems that even after achieving perfection, they're not beyond the reactions that are due to them. So for instance, Parikshit Maharaj still died from Takshaka.
For example, Parikshit Maharaj did what?
Parikshit Maharaj was still killed by the bite of the snake bird.
You think that's a reaction?
No, it seems that it's Krishna's mercy in his life.
Yeah.
And yet the reaction that was to come for them, even after achieving perfection, it seems to come. For instance, Bali Maharaj too was tied up.
Yeah, so it depends on how, I'm interrupting. How you see misfortune that comes to a devotee is, it depends on what lens you look through to see the misfortune that comes to a devotee.
And in the case of Akrura, even after he achieved perfection through the process of Vandanam, not only does he get the reaction of the gopis' curse, but he gets through getting involved in a very, in a murder plot. So he seems to commit a further sin after achieving perfection. So I wanted to link this to what we discussed yesterday about his wobbly action is that coming from a wobbly heart, or is just simply, Krishna?
Is it a Leela of Krishna that he did what he did?
Yes.
What do you think? He's not an ordinary Prabhu.
Yes.
So he's under the care of Krishna's internal potency. I mean, listen to these prayers. And then Krishna responds by saying this like fantastic glorification of Akrura. Aside from what, Rupa Goswami says, he achieved perfection, what Krishna says about Akrura is really elevated. He's very dear to Krishna. He is very dear to Krishna. Krishna is very dear to him. So it's a different set of rules for a person like that. No, he was on a mission that's part of the, being sent by Kamsa, but it's part of Krishna's Leela that he was sent by Kamsa to bring Krishna to Mathura. So the rest of the Leela, and Narada was implicated too, by tipping off Kamsa. Hey, that ain't Shalda Devaki, you know where he is? Better get him. So there's no karma there's no karma. So there's something else operating here in what Akrura did. He is the recipient. Now the curse of the gopis is you will have to undergo separation from Krishna as we. Now it doesn't have to be the separation from Krishna is involved in a murder plot. But there are multiple purposes in the ways of the Supreme Lord's pastimes to teach many people many things, and us in particular. So it's my understanding that you might get a different answer from a different speaker. My understanding is it's a play of Krishna's internal potency, and Akrura had a role to play. It's puzzling for sure, because it could have played out so many different ways besides the way it played out. The murder plot, and he gets the Shyamataka jewel and he leaves, and that was the separation. Why? He didn't have to leave. He could have just brought the Shyamataka jewel to Krishna and fessed up. That would have been the noble thing to do. But, he did what he did. It wasn't because he was, weak. It's part of Krishna's pastimes that he did what he did, the way he did what he did. Because that's his position. He's a pawn on Krishna's chessboard, and he moves the way Krishna moves him. That's a pure devotee. And they may do things that, like, what? Why did he do that?
So Guru Maharaj, that phrase that Akrura achieved perfection through Vandanam, that means, because his life after that point still looks a little wobbly, but it means that he was a perfect instrument of Krishna.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And why did Krishna do things that way? Just like this discussion yesterday. Why did, like the question, Ram could have finished Vali some other way besides having Sugriva be the instrument of his killing Vali. There's n number of other options without violating, what Indra, that pledge that Indra had given about the one who wears that necklace. He could have done it some other way. He's very creative. So why did he choose that? He had purposes. And we don't second guess his purposes, saying, you did it wrong, Ram. You should have done it this way. It would have been much better. Then you wouldn't have all this hubbub about stuff. Why are you hiding behind a bush or a tree? And could have done it a different way. Teaching lessons. And, worldly people. And why did Krishna leave with being shot in the heel with an arrow? Why did he do that? Bewilder the atheists? Or there's other ways to bewilder the atheists, isn't it? Did he pick the right way? We're not going to second guess Krishna's choices. How are we doing? Any more discussion?
Yes, Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna Maharaj. Thank you for your class. My question is regarding Chitta-Ketu pastime, and I was reading a very nice quote this morning that says,
okay,
your life will become a masterpiece once you learn to master peace. And one thing that causes disturbance of our peace is the pride when we take initiation, we accept particular gurus. So you were mentioning the Chitta-Ketu pastime, and you reminded me of a very important point that Prabhupada makes in his purport to the 6th canto, chapter 17, verse 10 of the Chitta-Ketu pastime. And Lord Shankar-Shan, Prabhupada says, the difficulty was that Chitta-Ketu, having become a great devotee of Lord Vishnu, Sankarshan, was somewhat proud at having achieved Lord Sankarshan's favor, and therefore thought that he could now criticize anyone, even Lord Shiva. And we see this in the Ramaharshana Sutta pastime. Ramaharshana Sutta had a spiritual master, Vyasadeva. But Lord, so my question is that sometimes we hear that the spiritual master, when we take initiation, he protects us from all sinful reactions. So, but we see that sometimes we get a reaction because we think if I take a spiritual master, I can criticize now anyone, my spiritual master will protect me. Is that the right conception, or how do we respond if we have this conception in our mind?
Well, you know the answer to the first question, and then the answer to the second question is, how do we correct ourselves? Well, we submit ourselves to exalted persons, and especially Krishna, and we read the scripture. And if we're prone to that kind of behavior, then we need to recognize it and do a course correction. And course correction largely is from the internal and hearing. In good association we hear, and internally we do some course correction. Now, Subal, I'm looking at the clock, and it's time to end. Do we have many questions?
There are 5 questions from the internet. Would you like to take some of them?
I guess so. I mean, Sunila Madhava's got to go, and I've got to go too, but let's go quickly.
Okay. So, Shalini Tawar, Sneha Bali. Hare Krishna Guru Maharaj, I would like a small clarification on the sequence. When these prayers were recited by Akrura, you mentioned that these are recited after Krishna.
After?
After Krishna.
After what?
Krishna.
After Krishna?
That's what it said.
No, it's after. I mean, it's just that she may want to correct the language that she wrote, but it's after Krishna showed Akrura the spiritual world, and he's in the river Jamuna, and he's offering prayers. Those are the prayers. After those prayers come another set of prayers.
Yeah, actually, she typed it in another, so I didn't read it complete, so I mentioned again. You mentioned that these are recited after Krishna killed Kamsa and had met Kubja. But looking at the chapter sequence in the Srimad Bhagavatam, chapter 41, is Krishna enters Mathura, which means that Krishna hasn't entered in Mathura yet. Could you please clarify?
Oh, I assumed something. I assumed incorrectly. Yes, these are the prayers. I spoke incorrectly. This isn't when Krishna comes back and visits Mathura, visits Akrura in his home in Mathura. I stand corrected. Nice catch, Snehavali. These are the prayers. Go ahead.
Next one is by Archana Vaidya. Hare Krishna Guru Maharaj. In introduction to Bhagavad Gita, Srila Prabhupada says, at least theoretically,
that this what?
Srila Prabhupada says, at least theoretically, we should accept Krishna to be the Supreme Personality of Godhead.
Yeah.
So this is just knowing something in theory, and then as our journey continues, by mercy, we get some realization about Krishna's mercy and his statements in Bhagavad Gita. But still, this is not the understanding of Krishna Tattva. In our life, what does it mean to understand Krishna Tattva?
Well, you can understand it theoretically and then practically. That's what it means. That's what it means. And it starts with theoretical. Then it can mature to practical. Live your life that that's realization. Live your life with that understanding, that's realization. Go ahead.
Second question and last question on the internet. This is by also Archana Mataji. What is the meaning of understanding someone's exalted for a practicing devotee? On what basis one understands the exalted nature of a devotee?
Do you understand what she's asking? I don't.
It become clear at the last part. On what basis one understands the exalted nature
of what?
On what basis?
What basis?
One understand the exalted nature of a devotee.
On what basis does one understand the exalted nature of a devotee? On what basis does one understand the exalted nature of a devotee? That's the question. Guru Sadhu Shastra. Next. Okay. Prabhupada ki jai.